after which Demiurge retreated and merged with the sun.
And so it begins.
I'm doing what I enjoy doing. It's like other men like to play golf, so they play golf every chance they can. So you don't say to them, how come you're playing golf today? You played last week. It was the same with me. To me, it is such fun creating characters, writing stories. It's an exciting life. And when you do something that you know the fans seem to enjoy, that gives you such satisfaction, you don't want to stop. Writing comes very easily to me. Everything else in the world is tough, but writing, I don't have any problem with that. I can't write fast enough to keep up with the things I want to say.
And so it begins.
I think you never outgrow your love of these stories of giants and ogres and witches and all of that. Superhero comics give you that.
Where most of the pocket dimensions of the universe began to take shape under the control of their respective rulers, the dimension of Asgard was coming into existence. According to Norse mythology, Asgard originated as a landmass split into two sections, with the north existing as a frozen barren wasteland, and the south existing as a fiery barren wasteland. With the two sections having 12 rivers that met in the middle, over time, the frozen rivers of the north began to overtake the south, giving way to the birth of Ymir as the first frost giant. Finding himself exposed to the warmer air of the south, Ymir began to shrink in size, eventually melting away entirely and revealing a man and a woman. Following this, a bovine appeared through unknown means and provided nourishment to the man and woman through its udders, finding its own sustenance by licking away at the ice. Following this pattern, the bovine eventually licked away at a block of ice which revealed itself to be Buri, who in turn spawned Bor, the founder of Asgard and the father of Kul, Vili, V, and Odin. Where the realm of Asgard would evolve to see Odin rising to power and mating with Gaia to produce Thor. During this time, a race known as the Zorians traveled the spaceways, seeding life throughout various planets, spawning the Kree, the Skrulls, and humanity, who in turn began to evolve within the confines of their own planets and forming their own kingdoms. Following this, around 1 million years prior to the current day, the Celestials continued their journey of exploration across the cosmos, eventually stumbling upon Earth. Viewing the planet as a host for a celestial egg, the Celestials themselves planted their egg within the Earth and began experimenting on a group of primitive men known as the Wanderers, who were gathered together by Gaia. Through the experiments of the Celestials, 3 sects were formed: the Deviants, the Eternals, and humans. Receiving their modifications from Zeron the Tester, the Deviants represented instability, with their race experiencing unchecked mutations, leading to each offspring experiencing a half-life of the previous generation, reducing the overall length of the Deviants' expected existence. From Nazar the Calculator came the Eternals, beings who were perceived to be perfect in terms of evolutionary maturity and possessed the power to tap into and manipulate cosmic energies. Finally, Oneg the Prober created a latent gene within the remaining humans, allowing for limitless expansion of genetic potential. Sending the races forward into Earth, where the 3 groups were modified to serve as protectors of the celestial egg. Instead, each race gave in to their natural state. The Eternals took to the skies, building kingdoms for themselves with no concern for the goings-on of humanity or the Deviants. At the same time, humanity found itself enslaved by the Deviants, who used humans to build their various structures and cities. Lasting until 16,000 BC, when the Celestials appeared on Earth a second time, the race was attacked by the Deviants, who viewed the Celestials as a threat to their dominion over Earth. Devastating the Deviants' numbers and sending the survivors underground, the Eternals abandoned the planet, taking up residence on the Saturn moon Titan, as well as exploring the rest of the cosmos. Leaving the landscape of Earth open, humanity began to spread and expand their sphere of influence to the furthest corners of the world, creating empires and kingdoms, with each worshipping their own deities. During this time, and while in the midst of a war with their rival race, the Skrulls, the Kree race observed the actions of the Celestials and looked to expand their own sphere of influence by modifying the genes of humanity, allowing them to take on forms identical to other races, which in turn would allow the Kree to subvert those races from within, paving the way for them to conquer those planets. Kidnapping various humans and modifying their genes, the Kree ruler known as the Supreme Intelligence foresaw the end of their race at the hands of their experiments and in turn ordered all experiments to be cleansed and all knowledge of their existence to be stripped from Kree records. However, in its rush to judgment, the Supreme Intelligence failed to take notice of 5 experiments in the form of primitive man, the Badoon, the Dire Race, the Chameleons, and the Centurions. Where each of these groups continued on unaware of their lineage, within the confines of Earth, the Kree experiments began to form their own ordered society under the theme of a monarchy. To this end, and at some point in their past, a geneticist named Randak discovered Terrigen crystals and began to synthesize the process of Terrigenesis, allowing the human experiments to undergo exposure to the mists, which in turn transmogrified the humans into unrecognizable forms, but sometimes possessing extraordinary abilities. Christening themselves Inhumans, the race kept itself isolated within the sacred city of Attilan, and away from the goings-on of the Deviants and the rest of humanity. Where the Inhumans remained isolated because of the actions of the Celestials in pushing the Deviants to near extinction, technology was lost to humanity for a millennia, sending the race into a near-feral state. Referred to as a Hyborian Age, this time period not only saw the introduction of Conan the Barbarian and Red Sonja, but also saw the rise of the First Mutant, as well as direct interaction with the second generation of gods. While almost nothing is known of Selene's past, what we do know is that because Selene maintains her longevity by absorbing life energies through physical touch, during the time of her birth, she unintentionally killed her mother. Viewing Selene as a goddess destined to rule the world, the tribal leaders of the clan ordered Selene's people to sacrifice their lives so they may live forever as part of her. Where Selene would spend the next several thousand years wandering the world, her journeys allowed her to witness the rise of the second generation of gods. Coming in the form of Norse, Greek, Roman, and other cultural mythologies, while these gods had existed for countless years, this time period saw their first interactions with society at large. Because of this, the cultures of the world gave way to worship to Odin, Zeus, Vishnu, Yahweh, and Amun-Ra, among others. While this remained the standard practice of humanity's relationship with the second generation of gods, the world was met with the arrival of its second mutant in 5000 BC.
But I enjoy the people I work with, because I work with writers, with artists, now with directors, producers, and I'm always working in an atmosphere where we're trying to think of what can we do now?
The small blue sphere existed as one of countless worlds within countless universes, developing their own lives and civilizations, all of which had been set in motion by the One Above All, and watched closely by the Living Tribunal. Known as the Multiverse, beyond this space existed what was known only as the Beyondverse, housing the White Lords of Wild Space. While their origin is unknown, unlike the Multiverse, the Beyondverse did not allow for travel between the past and the present. Instead, the inhabitants of the Beyondverse moved forward from one point in time to the next towards a future that could not be changed, all the while developing technologies and a level of power hitherto unrivaled. Traveling back to our universe and within the Andromeda Galaxy rested the planet Skrullos in the Drox system. In its early days, approximately 100 million years ago after their creation by the Zorians, the Skrulls existed as a reptilian race not unlike the smaller reptiles of Earth. However, after their exposure to the Celestials during their journey of exploration and scientific experimentation, much like humanity, the Skrull race was split into 3 sects: the Deviants, the Eternals, and the baseline Skrulls with modified genes, allowing for future mutations. While much of the race's history is lost to the sands of time, what we do know is that at some point in their past, unlike the human Eternals who left Earth to explore the stars, the civil war between the Eternal and Deviant Skrulls saw the Deviants victorious, pushing the Eternal Skrulls to the brink of extinction. With the Eternal Skrulls all but dead, the last of this group, a being named Kliban, convinced the Deviant Queen Slagurt to spare his life and take his hand in marriage, offering up a truce in the process. Leading the Skrull race into a religion known as the Book of Worlds, all surviving factions of the Skrulls were united under this ideology and moved forward in a manner akin to manifest destiny, believing it was their role to rule over the universe. Following this, and for countless eons, the Skrulls expanded their reach across the Andromeda Galaxy, but as their exposure to and subsequent conquering of other races swelled their number, many Skrulls became disillusioned with the Book of Worlds. Slipping into the realm of myth and legend, the Skrull Empire went to war with itself, each time emerging more technologically advanced and benign by weeding out those who sought to bring disharmony. To this end, and after having transformed into a society of space explorers on a mission of peace, the Skrulls traveled to the planet Hala within the greater Magellanic Cloud. Discovering that the planet housed 2 equally intelligent races known as the Kree and the Kotati, with the Skrulls considering Hala as a possible expansion of their empire, a group of Kree and Kotati were taken aboard a Skrull vessel and transported to the oxygen-rich blue area of Earth's moon. Provided with a year's worth of supplies and instructed by the Skrull delegation to build something worthy of their own race, while the Kotati used their plant-like design to build a lush jungle comprised of flora and fauna, the Kree built a massive city accessible only to themselves and the Skrulls. Viewing the Kotati's benign work as worthy of its initiation into the Empire, in a fit of jealousy, the Kree killed the Kotati and the Skrull delegation, looting their ship and assimilating their technology. Traveling back to their homeworld, the Kree waged war against the remainder of the Kotati race, pushing them to the brink of extinction while taking the planet of Hala as their own. Following this, and with knowledge of the Kree assault and the Skrull delegation reaching the Kree homeworld, the 2 races fell into war with one another, which would stretch over hundreds of millennia. Using their own forms of science and technology to engineer weapons of destruction, the Skrulls turned their sights to opening dimensional rifts for the purpose of accessing forms of energy guaranteed to annihilate their enemies. Accessing the Beyondverse through sheer accident, the Skrulls secured a fraction of the Beyonder's power, which confined itself to the shape of a perfect cube. Seizing it for himself and using its power to control matter and energy, the Skrull Emperor fancied himself a god. Ruling without challenge, unbeknownst to the Emperor, the cube developed sentience, copying the maniacal tendencies of the Emperor and annihilating 2/3 of the Andromeda Galaxy. While the Skrulls would rebuild their empire and consider the Cosmic Cube to be an artifact too dangerous to possess, after witnessing its power, the Kree race came to the realization that they would need a guiding force without the limitations of natural drive or possible betrayal. And so, under the guidance of the Kree Science Council, the race formed a sentient computer known as a Supreme Intelligence. Containing the minds of every Kree ruler, the Supreme Intelligence became as much a spiritual symbol as it was a leader. Guiding the Kree with their absolute loyalty, the Supreme Intelligence orchestrated the development of the Inhuman Project as a means to both subvert the Skrull race as well as other races in an effort to secure the Kree's dominion over the universe. However, at some point in the race's history, an unnamed member had attempted to secure an artifact known as the Crystal of Ultimate Vision, which allowed its wielder to perceive and manipulate the very fabric of the universe. Giving in to his basic instincts, the unknown Kree failed the final test, which measured the potential wielder's spirit. As a result, the evolution of the Kree race was frozen in time, keeping them in their current form, until the end of all things.
4, 3.
On the other side of the cosmos, the Shi'ar were developing their own empire. Originating with Shara and Kithri, according to Shi'ar legend, the 2 possessed untold power, but existed as opposites through good and evil, waging war against one another. Forced to marry through unknown means, Shara and Kithri were presented with the M'Kraan crystal, which had reformed through the birth of this new universe. Representing the union of Shara and Kithri, the M'Kraan crystal came to be viewed as a sacred artifact. To this end, the Shi'ar turned to the crystal as a representation of their race's destiny to marry planets together under the monarchy of the Shi'ar Empire, taking place over the course of eons and expanding across their corner of the galaxy. Unlike the Skrull Empire, which functioned with the Skrulls themselves at the center of power, The Shi'ar Empire existed as an amalgamation of races, with each one swearing absolute allegiance to the imperial crown. Shortly after this, and in an effort to secure their safety over their rule, the Shi'ar developed the Imperial Guard, offering all members of the Empire an opportunity to participate. Each race was allowed to send one member of their kind who stood as the race's strongest individual. As a result, the Imperial Guard was only comprised of a small number of members, but each one possessed a unique power, ranging from telepathy to telekinesis to energy manipulation. While the Shi'ar Empire continued to grow and expand within its own corner of the universe, the Eternals, who had abandoned Earth, had already taken up residence on Saturn's moon Titan. Winding the clock back, prior to the Eternals abandoning Earth, the group found itself led by two beings, Kronos, who sought peace, and Uranos, who sought war. With the inevitable civil war coming to fruition, Uranos and his ilk were exiled from Earth, eventually taking up residence on Titan. However, because the Eternals were, at their core, humans, one of the Elder Gods, known as the Dragon of the Moon, reached out from its dimension and looked to enhance its power by corrupting the wills of men. Inciting Uranos and his followers into a civil war, the entirety of the colony was nearly destroyed save for Suisan, an Eternal woman who remained alone on the desolate moon. Following this, and after the remainder of Earth's Eternals took to the stars, Suisan was greeted by those who stayed behind and took up residence on Titan as a means to continue monitoring Earth. Finding herself married to Alars around 20,000 years prior to the current day, Alars and Suisan gave birth to two sons named Eros and Thanos. Developing a highly advanced computer system named Isaac and repopulating Titan, while Alars and Suisan found themselves elevated to the position of rulers over the moon. Unbeknownst to the rest of the universe, a small corner of reality took a different direction. Within the Cygnus constellation and residing as the fourth planet from its sun, Zenn-La stood as a beacon of scientific and technological superiority. While its origin is shrouded in mystery, we can largely assume that in the early days of its development, Zenn-La experienced its own struggles as the planet's inhabitants came to understand their place in the universe. Along the way, the Zenn-Lavian belief in deities began to fade following the rise of Thrawn, the Saint of Science. Teaching the people of Zenn-La to concern themselves with only what could be witnessed and analyzed by their eyes, the actions of Thrawn ushered a scientific age of enlightenment at the cost of creating a rift between himself as well as his fellow gods and the Zenn-Lavians, owing to the idea that belief in mythical beings defied the nature of science itself. Using their knowledge of science in a defensive capacity, Zenn-La saw the issues of hunger, disease, and poverty swept away to be replaced by a paradise where each member lived without want. However, this enlightenment came with a high price. As a race that had previously experienced hatred and war, the citizens of Zenn-La were not unlike humans in that they thrived on free will and imagination. While the early days of their scientific discovery allowed for exploration of the stars, after charting all things and learning all there was to learn, the act of retreating into themselves left a void in their nature. With some turning to drugs and others turning to suicide or escape into a mental dreamscape, while their society did not crumble, it slowly reduced itself in number, all the while becoming removed from the goings-on of the universe around them, remaining secluded from all existence.
In our stories, I would occasionally have somebody die or introduce a serious subject. I didn't like to do it too much because basically I feel comic books, in fact anything I do, whether it's comic books or movies or television or animation, should be entertaining. And I never want to, and most of what I do is for younger people. I consider people in their 20s younger. In fact, right now, I consider people in their 70s younger. But at any rate, it was for younger people. And I didn't feel they should be burdened with too much heavy stuff. I felt they should read my stories, enjoy them, and come away feeling better. But at the same time, in trying to inject some reality, some realism into the stories, and also to surprise the readers, because it's important for a reader never to know what's coming next, thought occasionally I should have somebody die or get seriously ill, occasionally touch on some serious subject. Now, those are two separate things. The having somebody die was for the sake of drama and holding the reader's interest.
While the Age of Empires progressed, all forms of life, ranging from these spacefaring forces to single-celled organisms, all existed as but one version of themselves within our universe. Beyond this resided the multiverse, a massive interweaving of realities. While some of these universes were identical to our own, others differed greatly. If the legends of old are to be believed, at the beginning of all things, before the formation of the first universe, there existed the one above all as the supreme creator, as well as Nemesis. Possessing control over space, time, the soul, reality, the mind, and pure power, as the sole entity in existence, Nemesis fell into a state of loneliness and despair, electing to end its own life. Dispersing its energies in their entirety, Nemesis gave birth to the multiverse, planting within each universe 6 singular gems, containing a portion of its power. Traveling back to our universe, as the empires of various races grew and were replaced, the universe was being explored by the Phoenix Force. Unlike the traditional cosmic entities of Eternity, Infinity, Galactus, and others, the Phoenix Force did not contain different iterations of itself across the multiverse. Instead, despite the existence of infinite universes within the multiverse, there existed only one Phoenix Force. Representing the total sum of all future life born through the multiverse itself, the Phoenix Force existed with immense power, serving as a nexus for all psychic energy that has ever, currently does, or will ever exist. Initially existing as a formless mass of energy, while we don't know what the Phoenix was doing in the early days of the universe, what we do know is that in a universe wildly different from our own, a being named Necrom had come to understand the power of the Phoenix. Operating as that universe's Sorcerer Supreme, Necrom had taken advantage of the Phoenix Force's lack of experience in dealing with deception. Manipulating the Phoenix into building pillars across the multiverse, Necrom intended to converge all realities into a singularity, forcing a collapse of the multiverse and absorbing the energies emitted by its death, transforming him into a god. However, the schemes of Necrom were discovered by his students, and while he was defeated, the Phoenix went forward, operating largely within our universe and seeking to better understand the minds of mortal creatures. With the threat of Necrom reaching the ears of almost all beings across the multiverse, an individual of unknown origin named Merlin had come to the conclusion that the various realities of the multiverse needed a means of observation and protection against such a threat. Confining himself to a pocket dimension outside of all space and time known as Otherworld, Merlin set about creating the Omniversal Development Court, a governing body designed to observe the development of each universe within the multiverse and ensure their safety. Traveling back to our universe, while the planet Zenn-La remained in isolation from the various empires and forms of life, their position in the cosmos was about to radically change. On the far side of reality, Galactus continued his role as the Devourer of Worlds and found that his hunger was growing. Traversing the cosmos and coming upon Zenn-La as one of the many worlds rich in life-supporting energy, Galactus intended to consume Zenn-La. However, at the behest of one of its citizenry, Zenn-La's execution was stayed. Born to the brilliant scientist Joran, who encouraged his son to pursue knowledge, advancement, and achievement, unlike everybody else on Zenn-La who saw Galactus coming as their guaranteed end, Norrin Radd saw hope. Petitioning Zenn-La's Science Council to grant him a vessel, Norrin Radd struck a pact with Galactus. With the Devourer of Worlds becoming increasingly weaker due to having to search out his own sustenance, if Galactus spared Zenn-La, Norrin Radd would abandon his home and serve as Galactus' herald, traveling the universe in search of suitable planets. Agreeing to these terms, Norrin Radd was transformed into the Silver Surfer, who in turn would locate planets capable of satiating Galactus' hunger, but lacking sentient life. With the Silver Surfer serving his purpose, back in our solar system, the destiny of Thanos was beginning. As the son of Alars, an Eternal from Earth, Thanos was, at his core, human. But with both Eternals and Deviants stemming from the human gene, unlike those around him on Titan, Thanos was born with both Eternal and Deviant genes, making him a mutant among his own race. However, unlike Alars, who considered Thanos a worthy successor to the Eternal throne, Thanos' mother, Sui San, saw him as the death of them all. Initially trying to kill her son on birth, while Sui San was stopped by Alars, her claims of impending doom at the hands of Thanos led to her incarceration within a mental institution. Spending his childhood as a pacifist, Thanos kept largely to himself, playing only with his brother Eros. However, after encountering a fellow student, her manipulations began to see the views of Thanos shifting from non-aggression to obsession with nihilism and death. Encouraged by his family to develop friends, the young Thanos was tricked into visiting a cave alongside several other students. Experiencing a cave-in, Thanos was forced to bear witness as his friends were consumed by lizards. Forced to return to a life of isolation, the young girl persuaded Thanos to drop his pacifist nature, returning to the cave and killing the lizards. Following this, and at the behest of the young girl, Thanos began kidnapping various creatures from around his city, initiating a series of grisly experiments that killed them, but enabled Thanos to better understand the natural physiology of organisms in his search to understand why he was physically different from everyone else. Continuing along this path, by his teenage years and after expanding his experiments to his own race, Thanos had murdered 17 individuals, many of whom were his own classmates. Failing to find his answers, the more Thanos engaged in murder, the more his focus shifted from research to desire, after which he abandoned Titan and took to exploring the stars. While the path of Thanos would lead him inexorably towards his fate, back on Earth, the Elder Gods refused to be forgotten. After spending 3 billion years in isolation, a handful of Elder Gods sought to use mankind as a means to ensure their legacy. Coming together in the form of the Octessence, the Elder Gods Watum, Balthak, Ekon, Farala, Sidorak, Kraken, Ragador, and Voltar came together for a test to determine the strongest member among them. Creating an artifact of their own design, those humans who continue to worship the Elder Gods built tombs housing these artifacts. Sealing the tombs and sacrificing their lives, these items would remain until one was touched by human hands, after which humanity would be drawn to the remaining 7, and those that acquired them would lead humanity in a war against itself. While time would see the passing of 4,000 years before this prophecy would be fulfilled, with the existence of these artifacts remaining hidden, the ancient mutant Apocalypse was beginning his reign. Following his escape from the confines of Egypt, Apocalypse went forward throughout the world, pitting various civilizations against one another as a means to eliminate the weak from the strong. During this time, and in the 15th century, Ensobad-Nur had fancied himself a warlord, building an army of the strongest fighters from those civilizations he had conquered, and christening them the Riders of the Dark. Using the Riders to conquer more territories, the life of Ensobad-Nur and the future of the world was changed irrevocably with the arrival of Nathan Dayspring. Hailing from 4,500 years in the future, Cable, from the time of his adolescence, knew only of a world ruled by Apocalypse. Imposing his philosophy of social Darwinism, under the rule of Apocalypse, Earth had become a cruel and brutal place, where the weak were eliminated to make way for the strong. Intending to keep his future from coming into fruition, Cable traveled into the past under the guise of the Traveler, intending to end Apocalypse before he could seize power. However, during Ensobad-Nur's travels, he had encountered a ship left behind by the Celestials during their experiments on early man. Unable to access its technology during his original encounter, Apocalypse greeted Cable as an enemy, with the two doing battle against one another. While Cable proved himself the victor, his cybernetic blood merged with Apocalypse, allowing him to communicate with the ship. Striking a pact with one of the Celestials, Apocalypse was granted use of their technology and went forward with a host of new powers, hell-bent on world domination. Bearing witness to the fruits of his labor, Cable was forced to come to recognize that he himself was the being responsible for engineering Apocalypse's rise to power.
Venture 4. Hey, team! Enjoy the amplifier!
The most important thing that I always tried to do was concentrate on the characters. Even before I would dream up the story, I would try to think, who are the characters? What are their personalities? What type of people are they? And why should a reader care about them? Why should a real reader be interested in them? To me, the same thing holds for movies, television. You've got to have characters that the audience, the viewer, the reader cares about. Once you do that, making up stories is easy. The serious themes that I would occasionally inject were for another reason. I began to realize, judging by the fan mail that we received, I began to realize that our books had quite an influence on the readers. And I kind of took that seriously. I felt if these people are reading my words and the words of the other writers working for Marvel, I felt we've got to be careful and we've got to make sure that we're not giving them the wrong messages.
While Apocalypse's pact with the Celestials allowed him to go forward from Egypt as the most powerful earthbound being at the time and forcing civilizations around the world to worship him as a god, on the other side of the Nile River in Northeast Africa, gods of a different sort were becoming involved in the affairs of humanity. Winding the clock back to 3 billion years ago following the banishment of the Elder Gods, Gaia, who embodied the Earth's spirit, spawned children of her own, who took 3 forms: the Titans, the Cyclops, and the Hectonaires. Favored by their father Ouranos, the Titans embodied his lust for battle and his formidable strength. Testing one another through physical combat, the Titans ruled from on high as their brothers the Cyclops and Hectonaires were banished to the other dimensional realm of Tartarus. Grieving for her children, Gaia besieged the Titans to destroy Ouranos, a task ignored by all but one. Seeing the opportunity as a chance to rule and taking up arms against his father, the youngest Titan named Cronus castrated and murdered Ouranos, who used his dying breath to curse Cronus with death by his own son. Refusing to honor the request of his mother to free his brothers and seizing Mount Olympus as his own, Cronus took a bride in the form of Rhea, who in turn gave birth to Zeus. Turning against her son, Gaia smuggled Zeus from Olympus, raising him to become a fierce warrior. Growing into adulthood, Zeus freed the Cyclops and Hectonaires, leading a march against Cronus and his Titans. Defeating his father, all the Titans' soldiers were banished to the realm of Tartarus, where they were watched over by Hades, allowing Zeus to emerge as the king of gods. Turning his sights to the Titan general Atlas, Zeus dispersed eagles across the earth. Surveying his domain and locating the center of the world, Atlas was imprisoned on the island of Atlantis, doomed to spend eternity holding the heavens on his shoulders. Becoming a home to the deviants following the first experiments of the Celestials, the Kingdom of Atlantis served as a trading hub of the deviants themselves and free men, allowing sailors and merchants to barter trinkets and items from around the world. Spanning the globe and reaching as far south as Antarctica, the Atlantean civilization discovered the Savage Land as a place of beauty, housing flora and fauna. Exporting animals from around the globe, despite their advanced technology and attempts at explaining how such a lush jungle could exist in the Antarctic, the truth of the Savage Land eluded the Atlanteans. However, during the Deviants' battle with the Celestials, the highly advanced Atlantean civilization immersed itself in spheres of unknown composition under the belief that the conflict would lay waste to the world. Bearing witness as the Deviant and Celestial war shook the skies and threatened to crack the earth in two, the island of Atlantis fell beneath the surface, where it would remain hidden from those on land. As the ages passed and time allowed for mankind to flourish on the surface, primitive tendencies gave way to a reconstruction of organized society. Constructing empires that grew through conquest and were conquered in turn, the Kingdom of Atlantis evolved as well. With all technology lost save for their protective spheres and miscellaneous instruments, using their knowledge of alchemy, Atlantean priests began to modify the genetic structure of their people, allowing for the ability to breathe underwater. Remaining isolated from the goings-on on the surface, this time period of Atlantean history saw the rise of two of history's most important beings, Mirrodin and Morgan Le Fay. Departing the Kingdom of Atlantis and taking up residence in Great Britain, where Morgan Le Fay opposed the idea of Britain transforming into a religious empire, Mirrodin supported the cause. Forming a pact with Mordred, the illegitimate son of King Arthur, Morgan Le Fay sought to subvert Arthur's rule over Britain, capturing the Kingdom of Camelot and eventually the world. Invoking his knowledge of alchemy, Mirrodin rechristened himself Merlin, and using his magic to empower the Ebony Sword, selected Sir Percy of Scandia to protect the Kingdom of Camelot. Operating as an agent of both Merlin and King Arthur, Sir Percy of Scandia defended Camelot on several occasions, saving the life of King Arthur and securing his legacy as one of Camelot's greatest warriors. However, unbeknownst to King Arthur, Merlin, or Sir Percy himself, the Ebony Blade had a will of its own. Forged through combat and solidified through bloodshed, the Ebony Blade developed a curse, dooming all who wielded the sword to a hunger for battle. Meeting his death during the fall of Camelot, the spirit of Sir Percy endured, appearing to all descendants of his bloodline who were found worthy of wielding the sword. Moving away from Britain, within the territories of both Africa and Egypt, a handful of second-generation gods had formed their own followings. Originating in Egypt proper, unlike her counterparts who maintain their ties to the Egyptian culture, the panther god Bast elected to forge ties to both Egypt and Africa. Worshipped within the Egyptian city of Bubastis as the goddess of pleasure, the adoption of Bast as an African goddess did not occur until 10,000 years ago. Hailing from the far side of the universe, whether through fate or divine means, a meteorite smashed into the atmosphere, scattering debris across the planet. While some landed in Antarctica itself and various other territories around the globe, the largest fragment made landfall in Wakanda. Discovered by Bashinga, who led a small band of nomads, the vibranium meteorite was believed to be a gift from Africa's gods. Forging weapons that utilize vibranium's natural ability to absorb sound and energy, where one half of Bashinga's tribe went forward as the dominant group in Africa, the other half were mutated through the radiation permeated by the vibranium ore, becoming demons of darkness and rage. Praying to the African goddess Bast to aid his people, Bashinga was bestowed with the powers of the Panther God, defeating the dark demons. Serving as protector of Wakanda's vibranium stores, Bashinga kept his lands hidden from the world, all the while continuing to utilize the powers of the Black Panther and becoming the first in a line of descendants who would share this role. While the small settlement of Wakanda began its journey to become a kingdom, the various members of the second generation of gods were becoming more involved in the lives of mortal men. Forming a council of godheads known as the Sky Fathers, within the territories of Greece, India, Scandinavia, and North America, these Sky Fathers represented the various religions of the world, ranging from Christianity and Catholicism to Hinduism and Taoism. Routinely interacting with humanity, albeit by indirect means, not all who were aware of this influence approved. Returning to Earth for a third time with the intention of judging humanity's evolution as worthy of continued existence, the Celestials were displeased with the Sky Fathers' influence on human civilization. Bringing with them the power to destroy the Sky Fathers with but a thought, the Council of Godheads were instructed to refrain from involving themselves in the affairs of mortal men, lest they find their empires destroyed and their lives forfeit. As a result, the Sky Fathers grudgingly honored this request, with their legacies fading from humanity's mind, to be replaced by myths and legend. By the 12th century, humanity sat nestled in the Middle Ages, where this era would see the rise of Genghis Khan, who would go on to form the largest empire in recorded history at the time, as well as the tail end of the religious crusades. One of the most powerful mutants to have ever existed was running headlong into his destiny. Born to a wealthy French family, Bennett du Paris had wanted for virtually nothing. Fighting in the Crusades as an adult, during his travels, the Pole of Destiny had revealed whispers of an eternal pharaoh in Egypt, capable of granting untold power. Driven by ambition, Bennett traveled to Egypt, after which he was met with a disembodied voice, asking if Bennett was willing to sacrifice who he was to become something better. His powers were awakened, granting him a level of telepathy and telekinesis hitherto unchallenged. Forced to do battle as a test of his abilities, Bennett du Paris emerged victorious, going forward as Exodus. However, unbeknownst to Exodus, his powers had been awakened by Apocalypse. Forced to do battle against his allies, Exodus turned on Apocalypse, proclaiming him a false god. Engaging in a battle against the tyrant alongside his allies, Exodus was swiftly overpowered, after which he was sealed away within a mountainside. While Exodus slumbered within his crypt, 300 years passed and saw the world changing. Europe was experiencing a renaissance of art and science, the Roman Empire was collapsing, and Joan of Arc was turning the tide of the 100 Years' War between England and France. During this time, and within the mystic city of Kamar Taj in the region of Tibet on the western side of the Himalayas, the world was met with the birth of Yao. Spending his youth as a peaceful farmer, Yao was greeted by a fellow villager named Kalu. Exposing Yao to knowledge of magic and sorcery, the two journeyed together through the realm of mystic arts, learning to control the wills of men and harnessing the power of immortality. However, as Kalu expanded his knowledge of sorcery, so too did he expand his lust for power. Taking over the minds of local farmers, the maniacal tendencies of Kalu led to a battle between himself and Yao. Laying waste to the city of Kamar Taj, Yao banished Kalu to the crimson dimension of Sidorak, after which Yao christened himself the Ancient One and sought others like himself.
It really has to do with talent. I think the people at Marvel who are making these movies are the most talented movie makers on the face of the planet. They go back to the roots of the comics and they say, what made this strip so successful? And once they decide what that element or those elements may be, they keep to those elements. They're starting out with very colorful characters, but if they put them in the real world and they give them real problems, then everybody wants to see it. I know the characters and I can't wait to see the movies. And you see, for me, superheroes will always spark the imagination of people around the world, regardless of their background, because I think that people are always looking for something that represents the ideal person or the ideal situation. One thing I might mention, most writers, and I think it's an unfortunate thing, they try to write something that they think a certain audience might enjoy. I've never been able to do that because I can't put myself in the mind of other people. I only know what I enjoy. So every time I've written a story, I've always tried to write the sort of story that I myself would enjoy reading. A story that would interest me while I'm writing it, as I'm waiting to find out what happens next.
As the journey of the Ancient One continued, leading him ever closer to his encounter with Dr. Stephen Strange, one of the world's most dangerous villains, was emerging. While almost nothing is known about his parents or birthplace, what is known is that as a child, Nathaniel Essex was gifted with an aptitude for intelligence which largely went unexplored until his adolescence. Journeying to Greenwich Park in London, Essex did not view the world like everyone else. Where the citizens of London looked to religion as an answer to their purpose in life, Essex believed that the gods were but one facet of the universe, with humanity moving forward toward its guaranteed future. Applying his intelligence as a means to understand the place of humanity within the cosmos, Essex received a full scholarship to Oxford University, where he pursued a career in biology. Becoming obsessed with evolution, Essex came to believe that humanity stood upon the precipice of change, and that if it had not begun already, a time would come when human beings would begin to evolve. Creating a crude representation of what these future humans may look like, Nathaniel Essex was denounced and exiled from the Royal Academy of Sciences, all the while remaining completely unaware that he was being watched by curious eyes. Despite having lived for thousands of years and traveling to virtually every corner of the world, Apocalypse had remained woefully oblivious to his true heritage. Disguising himself as a benefactor and traveling to London, through their conversations and investigations, Apocalypse came to realize that his powers did not hail from divine intervention, but through a mutation in his genes. Offering Nathaniel the opportunity to continue his experimentations without the restriction of age, Apocalypse used his celestial technology to modify the genes of Essex, allowing him to go forward as Mr. Sinister. Where the journeys of Essex would see him continuing his experiments, on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean, another mutant was emerging. Nestled within Alberta, Canada's Lakeland District, in 1885, James Howlett was born to Elizabeth Howlett and the family's groundskeeper, Thomas Logan. Ignored by his mother and shunned by his father, James spent the early days of his youth under the abusive control of his grandfather, who routinely beat his grandson, believing that a firm and harsh upbringing was necessary. Spending his time with two other children named Rose and Dog, the biological son of Thomas Logan and half-brother to James, as the three grew into adulthood, their attention began to shift to romance. Finding himself attracted to Rose, because Dog had experienced such brutal punishment at the hands of his father, like a feral animal, Dog forced himself onto Rose, leading to the expulsion of both Dog and his father from the Howlett estate. Flying into a drunken rage, Thomas returned to the estate, murdering James' father in front of him. Overtaken by grief and rage, the powers of James manifested, resulting in the protrusion of bone claws and a healing factor, after which James killed Thomas and left his home alongside Rose.
Armor patch here. Hey,
Moving away from Earth and transitioning to a frontier world in the Crab Nebula, Thanos continued his journey. Living an empty and unfulfilling life, Thanos produced children, looted the worlds of fringe galaxies, and murdered. Failing to fill the void of his life, the more children he produced, the more people he killed, and the more worlds he pillaged, the less he felt. Instead, and despite his best efforts, his thoughts wandered across the vastness of space to the young girl on Titan who guided him towards his first steps in killing. Curious as to her whereabouts, Thanos' attempt to drive her from his mind saw him taking up work on the Horkos, a pirate vessel led by a demented captain. Challenging the captain for leadership of the pirates, Thanos' victory saw him giving into his bloodlust, going forward as the Mad Titan. However, with the mysterious young girl tormenting his every waking thought and every sleeping dream, Thanos took his pirates and returned home in an effort to find her. Back on Earth, the 1793 advent of the cotton gin had marked the midway point of the Industrial Revolution, and where technology was advancing to allow for a better understanding of the world, unbeknownst to all, the entity Sublime watched closely. Evolving with the first forms of life on Earth, Sublime had spent countless eons jumping from one host to the next, using each human to carry out its schemes in sowing chaos and reaping wars. However, with the emergence of mutants, the alteration to their genetic code made them immune to the influence of Sublime. As such, the entity began laying plans for Weapons Plus, a program rooted in the idea of creating super soldiers. During this time, the Kingdom of Austria-Hungary remained the weakest of the First World nations, a situation exacerbated by the desire of the South Slavic people to break away and form their own nation of Yugoslavia. Where most looked to diplomacy as a means to achieve their goal, a group of Serbian nationalists calling themselves the Black Hand chose another path. Intending to eliminate Franz Ferdinand, the nephew of Austria-Hungary Emperor Franz Joseph, the Black Hand's belief was that in doing so, Franz Joseph would acquiesce and allow the South Slavs to break away. Carrying their mission to its completion, instead of allowing the South Slavs to form their own nation, Emperor Franz Joseph waged war, international alliances were invoked, and World War I began. As the powers of the world squabbled over land and glory, Sublime continued to operate in the shadows. Using the post-World War I chaos of Central Europe to his advantage, Sublime took over the body of a human host, dubbing himself John, and began to manipulate various intelligence agencies around the United States. Arguing that the threat of World War I proposed a legitimate need for superpowered beings who would fight on behalf of the United States, Sublime was given a blank check by the US government, using those funds to bring his vision into reality. Coinciding with Hitler's invasion of Poland and the start of World War II, word had reached the ears of Sublime regarding a German scientist who had successfully developed a serum that augmented the abilities of normal men. Working alongside the United States military, John Sublime orchestrated the kidnapping of Dr. Abraham Erskine by Nick Fury and his Howling Commandos, after which Erskine was sent to task in locating the best suitable candidate for the use of his formula. Spending several years sorting through various soldiers, Abraham Erskine finally settled on a young, emaciated man whose lack of size hindered his attempts to enter the U.S. Army. Electing to meet the boy in person, Dr. Erskine was impressed by the man's courage and bravery, leading to the development of the Weapon Plus project's first successful test subject in the form of Captain America.
Origins of superpowers are always very interesting. If you get the right origin, like for example, Spider-Man being bitten by a radioactive spider, at least then the viewer has something to hold on to and to say, well, it might have happened, now I'll enjoy it. I can tell you exactly when Timely Comics became Marvel. The last name they had before they became Marvel was Atlas Comics. And after we did the Fantastic Four, we did the Hulk, Spider-Man, the X-Men, so forth, we suddenly began to realize, hey, we've got fans. So I decided we ought to change the name of the company, get something better than Atlas. And the very first book that Martin Goodman had ever published was called Marvel Comics.
Hurricane incoming! You're ready for action. Almost about out. See? I'm flunking.
winding the clock back to the late 1100s. While the rest of the world saw the rise of empires who squabbled over land and power, not every organization chose to operate in the light. Within the nation of Japan, Minamoto no Yorimoto had founded the first of the shogun in 1192. Ruling over Japan as a military dictator, the official class of its society followed a hierarchy, beginning with its line of kings, extending to feudal lords, with peasants and artisans at the bottom. Intending to escape this class of inequality, a handful of peasants and artisans took to the mountains of Iga and Koga. Living isolated from the larger society, these small bands practiced the art of ninjutsu, passing their teachings on to their children. Maintaining this lifestyle, in 1588, these isolated tribes were bound together under the rule of Kagenobu Yoshioka. Rechristening this organization as the Hand, they maintained their clandestine nature, coveting power above all else, and influencing the governments of the world through subterfuge and assassinations. By the early 20th century, the world had changed. Global exploration and the founding of new territories gave way to international alliances through trade and commerce. While individual rulers came and went, on the whole, the borders had already been drawn. Within Europe and the Middle East, the post-World War I landscape saw the actions of Leon Trotsky and Vladimir Lenin, paving the way for the reformation of Russia from an imperialist nation to the communist USSR. The Serbians, Croatians, and Slovenians formed Yugoslavia. Czechoslovakia, Bohemia, and Hungary formed their own territory, and the Ottoman Empire was replaced by the formation of Turkey, along with a handful of other federations. In the West, the United States and Britain became superpowers, referred to as the Roaring Twenties. For the American people, consumer spending was at an all-time high, owing to the decreased cost of goods through supply-side economics. The motion picture industry was emerging in Hollywood, California, and mass production had transitioned automobiles from a luxury to a commonly owned product of the middle class. Conversely, the early 1920s saw massive social changes for women in Britain. With World War I seeing so many men fighting overseas, women turned to working in factories, providing a wage and a measure of independence. In the post-World War I landscape, however, this autonomy remained, seeing the introduction of voting rights in 1918 to women over the age of 30, and an extension to these rights to women over the age of 21 by 1928. These changes and others elevated women from their previous positions as being subservient to cutting their hair, wearing shorter dresses, and taking on the moniker of flapper. For the German people, however, economic and social growth was nowhere to be found. Viewed as the agitators of World War I owing to the idea that they had nudged Austria-Hungary's Emperor Franz Joseph into waging war against Serbia following his nephew's assassination, Germany was considered to be the prime target for the Paris Peace Conference and the Treaty of Versailles. Enforced by the newly formed League of Nations, which was composed of World War I's victors to ensure a Second World War did not happen, the Treaty of Versailles required that Germany give up all territories obtained during the Second Reich of Otto von Bismarck, losing access to 16% of its coal fields and half of its iron and steel industry. The additional impacts of armed forces reductions and reparations virtually shattered the German economy, sending it into a tailspin of destitution and resentment. Forced to bear witness as land was purchased by foreigners who in turn started businesses and built homes, a small facet of German nationalists espoused the belief that their national identity was slowly being eroded. Going relatively unnoticed except for those who attended their meetings in small facilities on the outskirts, in due time, the Nationalist Party found a voice, who rallied their cause, and would take Germany by storm. By 1929, the American stock market crashed during what's become known as Black Thursday. With reliance on the League of Nations superpowers to enforce mandates and the reluctance of the United States to financially back restrictions when they were facing the Great Depression, the world was gearing up for the unavoidable. In Italy, Benito Mussolini marched on Rome in 1922 and wrestled control from King Victor Emmanuel III, taking over as prime minister and establishing complete control of the government while enacting right-wing fascist policies with nearly absolute power belonging to him. Seeing weakness in the League of Nations, Hitler sought to mimic Benito's actions, initiating a march on Berlin during the Beer Hall Push. While his actions ultimately failed, the Nazi Party had achieved a moral victory, during which Hitler spent his time in prison writing Mein Kampf, which detailed the belief that the German Weimar Republic had been complicit in destroying German society at the behest of Jews, as well as a plan to reinstate Germany as a world power. Rallying the desperate and impoverished German people, Hitler used the party's newfound popularity to force the German government's hand, becoming chancellor and eventually dictator. In Asia, the Far Eastern Crisis or Manchurian Incident was another failure of the League. Under flimsy pretexts and through manipulations by the hand, Japan invaded the Chinese region of Manchuria and set up a puppet government. However, with both Japan and China being members of the League at the time, the League nearly unanimously passed that Japan was the aggressor and should return Manchuria to China. Instead, Japan withdrew from the League and should have faced economic sanctions. But with the League's key members of Britain, France, and Russia facing economic hardships at the time, they did neither